I don't tell this to make anyone believe me. I tell it because the nights are getting louder, and speaking out is the only way I sleep at all. I moved into the apartment in late October. The kind of place you only take because it's cheap and because the landlord swears the character is part of the charm. The hallway outside my door was always dim, even when the motion light worked. You could hear neighbors breathing through the old plaster, a cough from 2B, the scrape of a chair in 2B again, someone whistling off-key down near the stairwell. The building felt like it had a pulse, slow, damp, a little feverish. The first night my keys slipped twice in the lock. I don't know why that detail sticks with me, but it does. Keys refusing to go where they should, as if the door didn't want me. Inside, a single mattress, a box of plates, a lamp that hummed when it was turned on. I slept with the lamp on. It made the shadows behave. The footsteps began on the third night. Just after midnight, I heard them in the hall. Not the heavy boots I'd gotten used to from the guy upstairs. Not the quick clack of heels from the woman who always smelled like wintergreen. These were bare, slow, the pads of feet meeting wood with the patience of someone counting. From the far end of the corridor, they came closer. I lay very still and told myself it was a neighbor and that the motion light had just burned out again. The footsteps stopped right outside my door and stayed there long enough for the lamp to flicker. I didn't breathe for a full minute. When I finally did, the air didn't smell right. There was a dampness to it, old leaves after rain, or hair left too long in a drain. I waited for a knock that never came. The footsteps began again, moving away toward the stairs, each one landing on the wood as carefully as a finger tapping a table. When they faded, the building exhaled, and I did too. It got worse. On the fifth night, the footsteps didn't stop at my door. They turned. The boards just beyond the threshold creaked in a way I hadn't heard yet, as if someone's weight had shifted toward me, as if someone had leaned close to listen. I pressed my ear to the door because fear does that to you. It makes you touch the stove. What I heard on the other side was not breathing. It was a small, wet sound, like something tasting the air. I slept with the lamp on again. In the morning, there were 3 long smudges across the paint near the peephole, gray and faint, as if fingers had rested there and then dragged away. I told myself a story, a neighbor's kid, a prank, the wrong door. That worked for 2 days. On the 8th night, someone whispered my name. It wasn't even a whisper, really. It was my name spoken into wood, the syllables sliding through grain. I froze on the couch, my book open to the same paragraph I had been rereading for an hour, and waited for it to come again. It did, this time with a breath on the final vowel, like the end of a plea. I walked to the door with my hands out, palms up, like I was approaching a ledge. I didn't look through the peephole. I don't know why. Maybe I knew I would see nothing. Maybe I knew I would see something I wouldn't be able to forget. When I spoke, my voice sounded like someone else's. "Who is it?" The building swallowed the words. The lamp hummed. The whisper didn't come again. The footsteps did, moving away, slow, counting. I asked the landlord about the hallway the next morning. He said the floors warped in summer and remembered in winter. That a building this old made noises like an animal. That whatever I heard was the settling. He said it like a sentence he had learned by heart. When I asked how long the apartment had been vacant before me, he scratched his jaw and said, "Long enough to get the paint dry." That night, there were no footsteps. Instead, there was a soft knock, not on my door, but on my bedroom wall, the one my headboard touched. 3 times, spaced evenly, patient and polite, I slept on the floor in the living room, and when dawn came, I found fresh scratches where my head had been. 3 shallow crescents pressed into the paint, like the marks a little hand makes when it's trying to steady itself. I started leaving salt by the door. I don't know where I read that. It feels like something my grandmother would have said, though she never spoke of ghosts, only of saints. A neat, careful line of salt along the inside threshold. I also set a glass of water by the door each night and checked it in the morning for ripples I couldn't explain. Sometimes there were none. Sometimes there were rings like the glass had been moved and put back exactly where I'd left it. I stopped sleeping with the lamp off altogether. The elevator at the end of the hall died in the 2nd week, and the building felt longer without it, like a throat without a voice. I had to pass the spot where the footsteps always began when I took the stairs, and the air there was cooler, as if the wall kept a secret it couldn't warm. I tried humming when I walked by, a trick I'd picked up to blot out the places where silence feels too sentient. It didn't help. The neighbor in 2B, a thin woman with a scarf that looked like it had grown out of her neck, caught me outside and asked if I was the one who'd moved in. I said yes, and she said, "Don't answer at night." She left it there, as if that was a full instruction people should be born knowing. On the 14th night, I made the mistake of putting my hand on the door when the footsteps stopped outside it. I don't remember deciding to do it. My palm was just there, flat on the wood, feeling the tremor of each breath on the other side. When I tell you the door was cold, understand that I mean winter cold, deep cold, something from the basement cold. There was no draft. The radiators hissed like snakes in sleep. But the door held a cold that had depth to it, like water does. My name again. Not whispered, spoken, like a habit, the mouth that said it was very near. I felt its careful exhale come through the wood as if wood were skin. I said nothing. I think that matters. I think something in the hall wanted me to say its name back, to make the conversation official. Instead, I took my hand away and stepped back and stood in the light and waited. The doorknob turned exactly the way a person does it when they don't want the metal to click. It turned and turned and turned until it couldn't anymore, and then it paused. A puzzled pause. Then the turning came back the other way, patient, as if whoever stood there had all the time in the world. I slept on the floor again. When I woke, the salt line was no longer straight. It had a shallow notch in it, the shape of a heel. I started hearing the footsteps during the day. Not often, and never as close, but they were there, in the stairwell when I came home for lunch, in the hallway when I came back from the laundromat. They kept the same cadence. Count three, count three. Sometimes I'd have my key at the lock and hear them begin at the far end. And I'd rush the key and scrape the brass and bang my hip and fall inside and shut the door like someone running from weather. I changed my lock. It didn't help. I hung a bell on the knob because of something the woman in 2B said. It doesn't like to be named and it doesn't like to be announced. The bell gave me 2 nights of quiet. On the 3rd, the bell made a sound I've never heard from metal, something like a voice in pain. I opened the door to take it down, and the hallway smelled like old laundry left to sour. I stopped asking the landlord anything. I stopped asking anyone. The rules the building had taught me by then were simple. Do not speak to it through the door. Do not look through the peephole. Do not put your ear to wood. Salt the threshold. Turn on the lamp. Pretend to sleep. Pretend harder. On the 19th night, I broke the 2nd rule. The footsteps were already there when I woke. No approach, only presence. I couldn't even tell if they were moving. It sounded like weight shifting from heel to ball, patient, unhurried. I went to the door without the lamp, my hand skimming the wall, and I said out loud, very clearly, "You cannot come in." I don't know where I learned that sentence either, but it felt like a rope I could wrap around my wrist and hold. When I put my eye to the peephole, the hallway beyond looked more narrow than it was, as if the building had inhaled. The motion light was on. The floorboards were empty. All the doors were shut. But the peephole glass is a fisheye. It shows you a world bent into a circle. I saw the far end of the hall, and the near, and somewhere in between, close enough to the door that it should have been invisible, something moved. Not a person, a lack. A vacancy in the light. An absence shaped like a person standing very close and leaning nearer. Its mouth touched the wood. I know how that sounds, but I felt it in the way the door vibrated to a syllable. My name again. Louder this time, like someone insisting you remember them. When I didn't answer, it made a sound. Not a word. A small, pleased sound, the one you make when you see a bruise you forgot you had. The peephole went dim, a shadow of a shadow, and I understood that what was on the other side could see my eye the way I saw its absence. I went backwards, very slowly, until my knees found the couch. The lamp hummed. The humming felt like a friend I had wronged, but who loved me enough to stay. The footsteps moved away, but each one landed in the wrong place, like a record skipping. Far, near, none of it in the right order. When the stairwell door finally creaked, I cried without knowing I'd been holding my breath. There's more, but not much that can be proved. People always want proof. They want photos, recordings, fingerprints, and dust. I have the smudges near the peephole. I have the scratches on paint. I have the salt line, broken some mornings by a notch that looks like a heel and some mornings by the lower curve of a hand. I have the water glass with rings that appear and disappear. I have the lamp that hums. I have the bell that cried, and I have this. If I fall asleep before midnight, I wake to footsteps counting me back into the world. If I stay awake past 2, they stop for an hour and begin again at 3, which is worse. If I leave the apartment for the night and sleep at a friend's place, the footsteps are in the hallway there now too. Soft at first, like they're learning a new building. And then sure, like home. I don't open the door. I don't speak to it. I don't look through the peephole anymore. I keep the lamp on. I repaint the scratches and find them again where my head will be. I salt the threshold. I change the glass of water. I pretend to sleep. I pretend harder. The woman in 2B moved out last week. The landlord says it's a blessing. She was behind on rent. The new tenant asked me if the building was noisy at night. I told him it settles. Another sentence learned by heart. Last night, the footsteps didn't begin at the far end of the hall. They began directly outside my door, like I had missed the opening act. The doorknob turned once, firm, certain, and then stopped. The bell, which I'd hung back up out of habit, made the sound of metal remembering. The door leaned inward, not far, but far enough for the hinges to answer in a whisper. Then, very near the sill, a voice that was not my name said, "Please, that's new. I don't know what it means when it stops using your name. I'm telling you this so you know the rules, and because maybe rules work better when more than one person knows them. If you hear footsteps outside your door at night, count them. If they stop and the air goes colder, do not speak first. If the door is winter to your hand, take your hand away. If there are 3 scratches where your head will rest, move your bed. If the bell cries, leave it to cry. If it learns your name, never give it yours back. And if it ever says please, understand that it is not a question." I used to drive nights for work. Deliveries, small jobs, anything that kept the bills paid. Most of the roads were empty after midnight, and the hum of tires was the only company I ever had. It was lonely, but not in a way that bothered me. The dark felt honest. The world shrinks on a night road. You, your headlights, and whatever waits just beyond them. It was on Route 6, cutting through the backwoods of Pennsylvania, that I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder, half in the weeds, half in the glow of my high beams. Long dark hair, a white dress that didn't belong to any decade I knew, hanging heavy as though it had been rained on. At first I thought she was injured. She wasn't waving, but she wasn't still either. Her head was tilted, her arms limp, her body trembling in that strange way you only see when someone is cold to the bone. I slowed, because that's what you do. You don't leave someone like that by the side of the road. Her face came into view as I pulled closer, and I wish it never had. Her skin was gray, not pale, not sickly, but gray like old paper. Her lips moved as though she were whispering, but the glass kept her words out. I rolled down the window and leaned across. "Do you need help?" I asked. She didn't answer. She stepped toward the car, and her dress dragged against the gravel with a sound like wet leaves. I unlocked the passenger door. She slid inside without a word. The smell came first, damp earth, mildew, the heavy rot of autumn ground after rain. It filled the cab in seconds, coating the back of my throat. Her head hung forward, hair hiding her face. I asked where she was going. Nothing, only the faintest sound, like breath through water. We drove in silence for miles. My hand stuck to the wheel, slick with sweat. Every mile marker I thought she'd vanish if I didn't look at her. I tried once, just a glance. Her face was turned toward me, her eyes wide and pale, unblinking, lips still moving without sound. I turned the radio on just to break the silence. The static screamed. "Somewhere near mile marker 43, she spoke. One word, home." Her voice wasn't a woman's voice. It wasn't a voice made by lungs or throat. It was thin, stretched, like a wire pulled too tight. I swallowed and asked where home was. Her hand lifted, bones sharp under the gray skin, and she pointed down a side road barely lit by the moon. I shouldn't have turned. God help me, I shouldn't have. The road narrowed, trees pressing close, branches reaching into the beams. The smell grew stronger until I had to breathe through my mouth. I drove slower and slower, waiting for a house, a mailbox, anything. Nothing but forest. Then she lifted her hand again and whispered, "Here." I stopped. There was no driveway, no house, only black trees. When I turned toward her, the seat was empty, the door was shut. I hadn't heard it open. The smell was gone. For a long time I sat there with my hands welded to the wheel, headlights painting the trees like pale bones. Then, in the reflection of the windshield, I saw it. Not her face, not her eyes. but her mouth stretched in the glass just above my shoulder, still moving soundlessly. I drove without stopping until the sun came up. For weeks, I couldn't drive that route again. When I finally did, I checked every mile marker. At 43, the air turned cold inside the cab. Frost bloomed across the inside of the windshield, though it was June. In the side mirror, I saw her standing again at the edge of the road, waiting. I've never picked up another hitchhiker since. But sometimes, even on roads I've never driven, I see her, just outside the glow of the headlights, waiting, always waiting. I worked security for 12 years. Nothing fancy, mostly warehouses, construction sites, office buildings that didn't want squatters. The pay was bad, but the solitude suited me. People think night shifts are boring. They're not. They're quiet. Quiet in a way that lets you hear yourself think, until the night you hear something that shouldn't be there. In 2009, I took a contract at an old government office building downtown. It had been vacant for years, left to rot while the city argued about what to do with it. 14 stories, cracked windows, water stains down the brick. The lobby smelled like damp paper, and the elevators hadn't worked in decades. My job was simple. Walk the halls twice a night, make sure no one had broken in, and sit in the lobby until sunrise. First week was uneventful. A raccoon in the basement. A homeless man trying to find shelter. The kind of thing you expect. Then, around the second week, I started hearing it. Footsteps, not mine, not echoes, other footsteps. Always on the floor above me. I'd be on the third floor and hear them on the fourth. I'd go up, shine my flashlight, find nothing. Then the sound would start again, on the fifth. It was like I was being led upward, floor by floor. One night I followed them all the way to the 12th floor. My radio cut out halfway up, just static. The halls were stripped bare, office doors yawning open, papers turned to pulp on the floor. The air was thick with dust, but the footsteps stayed just ahead, never closer, never farther. Always waiting for me to follow. At the end of the 12th floor hallway was a locked door I'd never opened before. The footsteps stopped there. The air went cold. My flashlight flickered, and in that stutter of light, I saw something standing just inside the frosted glass. A figure, tall, still, not moving. I should have left, but I didn't. I tried the knob. Locked. I leaned my ear to the glass. That's when I heard it. The sound of breathing, deep and ragged. Too loud for someone standing still. Then, very faintly, a whisper, "Not yet." I went back downstairs and sat in the lobby until my shift ended. I told myself it was squatters, kids messing around, my mind playing tricks. But when I asked the supervisor for a key to the 12th floor office, he frowned. "There is no 12th floor," he said. I laughed, thinking he misunderstood. "Sure there is. I walked it." He shook his head. "Building only goes up to 11. 12th was never built. Blueprints are clear. I didn't argue. I didn't go back either, not up there. But the building didn't let me ignore it. Every night after that, around 3 a.m., the elevator doors would open on their own in the lobby. The elevator that hadn't worked in 20 years. The shaft was sealed, the cables cut, nothing but dust and dark. Yet the doors slid open smooth as glass, and from inside came that same sound of breathing. I quit a week later. They asked why, and I told them the truth. They laughed, said I'd been spooked by rats. But when I handed in my badge, the supervisor leaned close and said, "You lasted longer than the others." I asked what he meant. He only said, "It doesn't like being watched. I've done plenty of jobs since then. Warehouses, factories, parking garages. I don't scare easy. But sometimes, in the dead of night when my radio cuts to static and the lights flicker, I remember that 12th floor. I remember the footsteps, always just ahead, leading me higher. And I remember the shape behind the glass, waiting for me to open the door. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where night comes down heavy and the silence feels older than you are. Black Hollow, they called it, though no one knew why. Our nearest neighbors were 3 miles away, and after sunset, the only light came from the stars, or from the things that weren't supposed to be there. The first time it happened, I was 10. My father had gone out to shut the barn doors, and I watched him from my bedroom window. The air was cold enough to bite, and the fields were washed silver by the moon. That's when I saw the lights. They weren't headlights. They weren't lanterns. They rose out of the corn like fireflies, too big, too bright. Orbs, white and pale blue, drifting above the field in a slow, deliberate pattern. My father froze, one hand on the barn latch, staring. I yelled for my mother, but when she came, the lights were gone. For weeks, nothing. Then the sounds began. At night, we'd hear knocking on the walls of the house. 3 times, always 3. Sometimes soft, sometimes hard enough to rattle the glass. My father searched the property with his shotgun, but there was never anyone there. The dogs wouldn't leave the porch. They'd just stand, hackles up, growling at the dark. One night, my sister woke screaming. When we ran to her room, her window was open, though the latch was still locked from the inside. She said she saw a man standing in the field, his face too white, his arms too long. My father searched again. Nothing. By the 3rd month, the whole family was sleeping in the living room, too afraid to be alone upstairs. The knocking never stopped. Sometimes it came from the roof, sometimes from under the floor. Once I heard it from inside the walls, directly behind my head. Then came the humming. Low, mechanical, like wires straining. It filled the air just after midnight, and the lights returned. Brighter now, circling the house, pressing their glow through the curtains. The dogs whimpered and hid. My father stood in the doorway with the shotgun, but he didn't fire. Later, he admitted he couldn't move. It was like they held me still, he said. That night, the power died. We sat in the dark, clutching candles while the humming grew louder and the lights drew closer to the windows. My mother prayed under her breath. My sister covered her ears. I felt the floor vibrate, like something massive was moving just beneath us. And then, silence. When dawn came, the fields were flattened in wide, perfect circles. The corn bent but not broken, pressed in spirals too clean to be done by hand. My father burned the crops, but the marks never faded. We left Black Hollow 2 months later. My father never spoke of it again. My mother claimed it was all imagination, a trick of the dark. But I know what I saw. I know what we all felt. Sometimes even now, when the night is very still, I hear the humming again. Low, mechanical, patient. And I wonder if the lights are still out there, moving across some other family's fields, waiting.